Hi class, today we are going to review Cat 5 and we're going to start with question 1. We're going to watch this deadlift video real quick. Alright, the muscles of the trunk are contracting isometrically during this movement. They're contracting isometrically because his spine is neutral. He's not flexing or extending. There's no eccentric or concentric contraction because his muscles here are not elongating or shortening. The elongating and shortening, the eccentric and concentric contractions are happening here at the hip. And we'll move on to question 2. The group of muscles acting as agonists in the trunk during this movement are known as the erector spinae. So the erector spinae runs up the side of the spine, the rhomboids are in the shoulders, and the hamstring and glutes are the agonists for the hips. So we can conclude that the agonist of the trunk is the erector spinae. Question number 3. The blank muscle whose fibers run perpendicularly to the spine is crucial for proper trunk stabilization in this movement. So this is a part of knowing your anatomy. If we're looking at the axis of the spine, here's our spine, and here's our transverse abdominis, all right? The fibers of the transverse abdominis run perpendicularly this way, all right? Whereas internal oblique, external oblique, and rectus abdominis do not. Question number 4 is a squat. We'll take a quick look at that. Take one more time. Perfect. Okay. As the athlete is descending to the bottom of the squat, the lumbar spine exhibits flexion. So the thing to notice here is, first of all, where's her lumbar spine? So her lumbar spine is here, right above her glute max. It's where her tank top is meeting her pants. Okay. So if you look at this little wrinkle here in her shirt, look at what happens when she descends into the squat. The wrinkle is gone, okay? She's flexing here. It's as if her tail is being tucked, so that would also be called posterior pelvic tilt, and she's exhibiting flexion. She's not exhibiting extension of the lumbar spine because that would be as she ascends and comes up from the squat. Question 5. Over time, continued use of compressive loads, meaning the weight that she's using, with improper spinal mechanics could lead to weakness in this part of the intervertebral disc. So this is the annulus fibrosus. This is the ring around the cartilage of your intervertebral discs. And if you think about two vertebrae that are stacked, okay? So we have two vertebrae that are stacked. We have a compressive load. If we're not carrying this load properly, meaning the weights, we can cause weakness in our vertebrae, okay? So if we're looking at our vertebrae, if one side is not, if we're not in a neutral position, we're flexing or extending improperly, we can essentially open up that vertebrae, all right, and damage our annulus fibrosus because this disc that's in between my vertebrae will then bulge, all right, because I'm improperly flexing and extending my spine. All right, so we go either way. If you think about it like a gusher. If you've ever eaten a gusher, it's that little piece of candy with goo on the inside. So if you hold it in a neutral position, right in the middle, the goo is displaced evenly, all right? So that's our disc. The goo is our disc. And the gusher is, the top of the gusher is one of our vertebrae, and the bottom of the gusher is our other vertebrae, all right? If I squeeze or I pinch my gusher, all the goo is going to squirt out of one side because the weight, the compressive load, is not evenly distributed, all right? So if you think of it that way, you need to have a neutral spine, and that would be considered proper spinal mechanics. If you don't have a neutral spine when you're doing something with compressive load, all right, if she's rounding out her back instead of having a neutral spine, then her vertebrae are going to move, okay, improper spinal mechanics, which can in turn damage her annulus fibrosus. Question 6. Due to the athlete's technique at the bottom of the squat, the iliocostalis lumborum is being contracted eccentrically. All right, the iliocostalis lumborum runs right along the spine, so right here, all the way up. Okay, let's look at the video one more time. As she comes down, at the bottom of the squat, it's being contracted eccentrically because her muscles are elongating. Her iliocostalis lumborum is elongating. Question 7, we're going to look at this video. There's two different types of sit-ups. The first one, he's using his arms to come up, and the second one, he's just crossing his arms on his chest. All right? What you need to notice here, first off, is this second variation. Let's go back to the first and watch it. His spine isn't as neutral here because he's using his arms to pull himself up. The second variation, his spine is a little more neutral. So with that in mind, both variations of the above exercise are effective for strengthening the rectus abdominis, all right? He's strengthening this muscle here. While his internal and external obliques and transverse abdominis are engaged doing this exercise, he's primarily strengthening his rectus abdominis, all right? However, it's important to remember when doing this exercise that we need to have as neutral of a spine as possible. So the second variation would probably be the safest, especially if you're working with young kids or young athletes. Question 8. The variation with the knees bent, which is the first variation, will increase the contribution with the iliopsoas muscle. So this is false. With the hip already flexed, we are essentially canceling out the iliopsoas muscle, so it's not necessarily increasing the contribution from this muscle. There isn't an increased contribution as well because we are not reaching back and down. So if you've ever done a sit-up at the gym where you have space below you, you're on a machine, you have space below you, and you're coming back and you can essentially come all the way back further than the actual floor, then it might increase the overall contribution from the iliopsoas muscle, but because we're just laying flat on the ground, it's not increasing the contribution at all. Question 9. All of the following are ways in which the agonist in this movement could be further stimulated except, so our options are extending the lumbar spine, anterior pelvic tilt, extending the thoracic spine, and posterior pelvic tilt. So this is a little bit of a tricky question. Let's read it one more time. All of the following are ways in which the agonist in this movement would be further stimulated except posterior pelvic tilt. So if we go back up and we look at this exercise, let's look at variation 2. He's coming up. Posterior pelvic tilt is happening here. His pelvis is coming forward, all right? Essentially, his tail is tucking just a little bit. And that's at the end of the exercise. He's not fully engaging then his agonist muscles. His agonist muscles have finished the movement. So all the following here, extending the lumbar spine, anterior pelvic tilt, and extending the thoracic spine are all extension of the spine. Posterior pelvic tilt is in correlation with flexion of the spine, all right? So all of the agonists in this movement could be further stimulated except the posterior pelvic tilt because it has to do with flexing the spine instead of extending the spine. All right, question 10. Now this is a pretty tricky question. There's going to be a lot of different answers that are possibilities. I'm going to give you just a few, and then I will be looking over all of your answers and taking into consideration what you have written down. So we wanted you to wrestle with this question, so don't get discouraged by it, okay? The question says, using your knowledge of human anatomy, especially origins and insertions, explain the effect that each possible answer to question number 9, this question, could have on the agonist in our question 10. What are the effects of contracting a muscle from a stretched versus shortened position? All right, so let's start with our posterior pelvic tilt. This does not have a large effect on the agonist because it is occurring at the top of the sit-up. All right, so we've already done our movement. Our prime movement is over. So there's not much of an effect on the stretched or shortened position because the posterior pelvic tilt is up at the very top of the movement and our movement has essentially been finished, okay? So moving to anterior pelvic tilt. This would not be considered necessarily helpful because it continuously pulls the rectus abdominis into a stretched position, which can ultimately weaken your anterior core. The anterior pelvic tilt would mean that you're extending your spine just a little bit, and that would cause more of we're looking here, more of a space underneath where his hips and his lumbar spine are, which is not safe necessarily. Okay, moving to our extended thoracic spine. It helps to maintain mobility with movement going upwards, keeping the agonist engaged. That's at the very beginning of the movement, so he's here, he's loaded and ready, and he comes up right there. He's using his thoracic spine. It's loaded and allowing mobility, okay, for the movement upwards. And our last option is extension of the lumbar spine. So extension of the lumbar spine is the very last thing. It's right here, okay? It allows the agonist to finish the work completely, so to get up to that pelvic and posterior pelvic tilt. So this allows the work coming up to complete. Like I said, there's a lot of different answers that you can have for this question. Those are just a few answers that I have to give you. I am curious to see how you have answered this question yourself. There are 4 options here, so remember you're supposed to be addressing all 4 options, not just 1 or 2, not just the answer that you chose. So make sure that you are addressing all 4 options. Also remember too, if you haven't taken your second attempt for Cat 5, you can use this video to help you better understand these questions and then take your second attempt again. So I'm hoping that this video helped you. If you have any further questions on Cat 5, please send me an email and I would be happy to get back to you or schedule a Zoom call to talk with you face to face. This should help you study for your final. So if you're going over all of our CAPs 1 through 5, a lot of this stuff is going to be on the final. It's also going to be on the critical assignment, so make sure that you are going back and listening to all CAPs so that you're understanding the material to the best of your ability. So I look forward to reading the rest of your work this week. We are approaching week 8, which is our last week of class. Keep up the good work. Don't slack off now. Make sure that you're disciplined and you're giving your best effort. I'm really excited to read your critical assignments and see how you have understood the material in this course. So I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you all later. Have a wonderful day.